All right, so welcome to this webinar on communicating sustainability, on crafting a compelling narrative for effective corporate climate messaging. I'm very proud and honored to have Professor Ann Peirson-Smith and Dr. Alana James from Northumbria University and the Impact Plus program, our partners, join us today. This is the second part of the webinar series that they're doing on this topic. So if you do want to see the previous part, it's all on YouTube and on LinkedIn. You can have a look in at any point and view the whole thing. This is also a prelude to a course that we'll be running later on down the line on this topic by, of course, these two guests of ours. So very happy to start things off just a little bit in terms of admin. If there are any questions, we'll have Q&A towards the end of the session, but you can always just type in your questions in chat or in the Q&A box that you see. We're happy to get back. In case we can't get back to you directly, we will be sending out an email which is listing all the questions that were answered with responses from our guests and from ourselves, if that's needed, to talk about it. So without any further ado, let's kick things off. So quick introduction for myself. My name is Akhil. I'm the CEO of Green Story. We work on lifecycle assessments and have a platform to help companies to decarbonize, especially in the textiles and apparel space. And we're very happy to partner with Impact Plus program and Northumbria University to support companies in being more responsible, in being more sustainable, and now with this, in communicating that. So that's my spiel. I'm going to pass it on to Anne, who's going to take us through the rest of the slides.
Thank you, Akhil. And it's great to be here today. As Akhil just said, we are going to present today a workshop that follows on from the first stage of the workshop that we presented in December, which looked at communicating sustainably. And this is a move on from that, looking at responsible crafting of messages, really based on this premise that communicating fashion involves fashion sustainably involves sharing information about a brand's sustainable practices, and we're trying to encourage stakeholders to adopt more sustainable mindsets and behaviours. So today I'm part of that team. I'm Professor Ann Peirson-Smith, a Professor of Fashion at Northumbria University in Newcastle in the northeast of England in the UK. I'm part of a research project called Impact Plus that my colleague Alana heads up, and I'll introduce her in a moment. But fundamentally, we're looking at sort of environmental index measures that are promoting sort of circularity, and we're actually sort of testing those out and challenging those and sort of investigating that as part of UKRI funding. I've got a PR branding background professionally, and I have worked with fashion organisations, lifestyle organisations in this field. I also teach research and publish on sustainable fashion marketing, branding and management. And again, once again, it's just great to be here today, to be working with Green Story on this very exciting seminar series. And now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Alana James.
Thank you, Anne. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Great to be with you. So as Anne said, I'm Dr. Alana James. I'm an associate professor in fashion at Northumbria University in the UK, and I'm a principal investigator of the Impact Plus project. So the Impact Plus project challenges the way that environmental impact is measured across the entirety of the value chain. And we come at this from a very interdisciplinary approach. So as Anne said, she's from a PR and branding and communications background. I'm from more of a design background. So I use design innovation, design tools to challenge complex sustainability issues within the fashion and textile industry. And this really is where I centre my expertise around environmental impact and how we can really start to collaborate with industry, with different disciplines in academia to really start to create innovative and sustainable change for the industry moving forward. So just moving it on, Akhil, if we could have the next slide, please. I'm going to talk you through today's session. So as Anne mentioned, this is part 2 of 3-part seminar series that we're delivering online. We will be delivering in-person workshops in country in India later this year, and we hope to see many of you attending those as well. So if you did miss part 1, please do go back and catch up, and we will be communicating around when and how to join part 3 a little later. So today's session is really kind of moving that conversation on from part 1, where we really started to outline the kind of principles and the basics of how to communicate sustainability effectively. So today we're moving that conversation on. We're going to start thinking about strategic targeting, so how to identify and understand your target audience. Hugely important, obviously, to not only do communicate in a meaningful and authentic sense, but also to really understand how to speak to that audience. And we're going to spend quite a lot of time on that during this session. So not only knowing your audience, we're going to talk about how to compose those key messages. So once you've understood who these individuals are or organizations, then how do we speak to them? How do we craft those really compelling messages? How do we use the most appropriate language that will really speak to the audience that we are targeting? We're looking at how to avoid, obviously, those pitfalls of greenwashing. We can't talk around sustainable communications without really addressing the elephant in the room, which is obviously how we avoid greenwashing. So we're going to be looking at how we start to understand our audience, craft those compelling messages, and start to implement them whilst avoiding any kind of greenwashing, and starting to think about really authentic, meaningful methods and messaging around sustainability. We're going to be looking at this from a whole product life cycle. I think one of the key values and ethoses on Impact Plus is that we take a really holistic approach across the entirety of the value chain, and we're going to be mirroring that in our conversations today. But also kind of concluding with how we start to align these strategic target areas into and embedding that into our businesses and our operations going forward. And as Anne mentioned, we will have time for questions and discussions a little bit later on as well. So just moving on, we're going to start by framing the conversation. Thank you, Akhil. You must have read my mind. So just thinking more around how we understand impact. Obviously, within a fashion and textiles context, this is hugely complex. We work in very globalized, often siloed, often very distilled value chains, and obviously the measurement of that environmental impact becomes exceptionally tricky, especially when we begin to look at how data speaks to each other and how it can be scientifically rigorous to give us an accurate picture of exactly the impact that is generated across all stages of the value chain. So we know that this is a very complex area. We understand the challenges encountered in implementing measures across the value chain, but also in understanding and obviously communicating that as well. So we start to think about where impact occurs across the value chain. We can see these kind of peaks across environmental impact, and the image on your right hand side is from UNEP's report, and it's looking specifically at climate impact across the global apparel value chain. And obviously when we start to measure different impacts, these bars and barometers begin to change and shift, and those hotspots begin to change us in accordance. So we need to really kind of unpick this very complex story before we can effectively communicate it. And that's where institutions like Green Story really do start to step in and start to break down some of those barriers, with really understanding how to capture this and how to measure accurately and authentically the impact that is actually being generated. Obviously, we think about this in both an environmental but also a social aspect as well, and I've just listed just a few considerations. Obviously, this is a small snapshot of the myriad of impacts that need to be considered when we think about this across the entire fashion value chain. I can have the next slide, please, Akhil. So starting to think about this in more of a communication sense. And again, we started to share this in part 1 of our webinar series. So it's really important to not only understand how to measure and the actual factual impact that is being generated across your value chains, but we need to start to think about how to frame, focus, shift, and then eventually obviously communicate. So when we think about framing sustainability, we need to think about how we utilize that data, how we can interpret that data in a very transparent and authentic sense, but also how we speak to our audiences and how we gauge those reactions from the stakeholders that we're working with as well. We need to focus, obviously, on positive outcomes, but also to emphasize the peak points that we can start addressing. So understanding where those hotspots lie when we look at different levels of environmental impact, and thinking how we can then start to target those through meaningful action and obviously stakeholder engagement. We then start to move into that action phase. So we start to think about shift. So obviously we need to shift not only the narrative of the fashion industry, but also practice and behaviours as well. So these things are very coupled, they come hand in hand. We can't shift one barometer without the other. So it's really understanding how we can use effective communication to start to pull these levers and to shift these positive actions, practices and behaviours to create that bigger kind of overall impact or systemic change. And eventually communication, obviously, moving into the kind of focus of what we're going to be centering our discussions on today. So effective communication can be hugely powerful. It can speak to multiple stakeholders at different levels, and actually it can begin to really enact this change. So it's almost that kind of bottom-up approach of taking action and creating change. So we're going to be talking a little bit more around audience targeted messaging, but also kind of embedding that within your business as well, both at a product level, a stakeholder level, and to multiple different audiences as well. So just to recap, as I said, we are structuring this across 3 webinars. The first webinar, as I said, you can catch up on, but we started to really lay the journey and the foundations of what actually communicating sustainably means, and the kind of core principles, if you will. So we talked about the importance of authentic, science-based, credible and trusted data, and how we can start to interpret that to multiple different regulators and stakeholders, especially when meeting some of their expectations, especially when we think about that in terms of business relationships and building trust. We also started talking about how to connect with those audiences and how to enforce some of those core messages. So essentially it was more of a broader overview of the subject area. Today, we're going to be very much tapping into that in a bit more of a focused and detailed way. So we're going to be thinking more around what should be communicated. So thinking about substantiated claims, starting to think about the importance of omitted information as well as the information that is communicated.
I think Alana may have dropped off just there, but can you hear me?
Yes. Do you want to give her a minute, Anne? Because I know she's traveling. The internet was a little bit dodgy.
Yes. Okay. I mean, I can carry on talking.
Okay, perfect. Please go ahead.
whilst we're doing this. So, as Alana was saying, just really contextualizing where we came from, and this was really the content that we covered in the first seminar that you can access and go back and listen to. It was very much looking at sort of laying the foundations for what we're going to talk about today and get us pointing in the right direction, getting our mindset sorted and understanding the requirements of good sustainable communication, this authenticity, credibility, preparing us for what we consider is a journey in terms of communicating your sort of good practice. And of course, that also highlights to some extent the idea that it's not a one and done, and it's not to be perfect, but it's something that will evolve and will get better and be refined the more that you consider your responsible communication. And very much sort of looking inside and outside of your business, so understanding the context. And last time we talked very much, and we'll reference again, about the sort of regulatory environment, which will be driving a lot of our sort of good communications practice. It's increasingly legislation around sort of responsible communication, good communication, authentic communication, such as the Green Claims Code in the UK and the EU Green Deal will mandate sustainable practice across the fashion and textile supply chain. And so we have to identify what's expected of us fundamentally by governments and compare our sustainability positioning. And obviously, as Alana said, connect with our stakeholders. Next slide, please, Akhil. So this really sort of sums it up, really. These are almost, I mean, this image is quite sort of pertinent. It's almost our greenwashing instructions in terms of sort of what not to do. And last time we ran past you the best practices, what to avoid, and these are very much guided by the sort of pre-legislative sort of initiatives such as the Green Claims Code in the UK and the Green Deal. This notion of using generic words, avoid using generic words such as green even or recyclable, and if you are going to use those words, support that very carefully, and make claims based on fact and not just aspiration, and again make it very sort of tangible and sort of evidence-based. Just ultimately, as we're saying here, this gives you a sort of a sustainability positioning in the marketplace, and understand where you're coming from, who you are, what you're doing and why, and avoid the pitfalls of exaggerating, manipulation, misleading communication. And in doing so, this will enable us to connect with people who are our stakeholders and have a meaningful sort of two-way, trust-based sort of relationship with those people, whether those are our suppliers in a sort of B2B setting, or whether it's B2C with our consumers. And also, of course, mindfully with our competitors, because many brands and many organizations increasingly have to work together cooperatively in multi-stakeholder initiatives to ensure that we are all working towards the same goal and we're all going to meet our climate targets that are fast approaching. Next slide, please. So this leads us on to sort of reflect on what needs to be communicated. As we've seen, the fashion industry needs to meet its sustainability targets that I just mentioned, and to do so, we've got to change production and consumption behaviours and mindsets. We've got to really sort of focus on doing that. And I fully believe, and we fully believe, that the power of communication at the core of this relationship that we build with our stakeholders and our consumers is critical. Communicating sustainably has often been a very under-assessed area, and maybe, because communication is so natural, we tend not to often think about how important it is in our business strategies. But it does, no doubt, in this situation, and if we're looking at the sort of pre-legislation and the regulatory environment that's rapidly sort of crystallizing around green claims across the world, then we can see how important it's going to be and how important it is. And we've always got to ensure that our communication is transparent and authentic and true, to enable more responsible sustainability practices and behaviours, so to activate those. And so this is really important. So communicating in this way enables and drives the transformations that we need across the fashion and textile supply chain to meet those climate targets. So ultimately, we need to define how you're going to tell that story. And that's, you know, very, very important. You can see actually an example here from the CEO of Ganni, which is a hugely successful fashion brand that is, you know, based in Denmark, but that has come almost from nowhere in the last 10 years, but has gone from strength to strength, largely because it's very much based its whole sort of brand ethos on truth and transparency. And, you know, I'm just going to read this out. Let me start off, they say, by saying we don't identify as a sustainable brand. We never have. We don't know if fashion consumption can ever be sustainable. We go to work every day and try to do better. And I think this is a fantastic sort of statement from a CEO of a fashion brand, a current fashion brand, a contemporary fashion brand, a popular fashion brand, particularly with a younger sort of demographic. And a sort of young professional demographic, and it sort of shows how honesty and sort of is core. You know, transparency is core to the piece, but also it again emphasises how much of a journey that our communication sort of approach should be. That it's ongoing, and we're constantly revising it and updating it, and we're constantly doing better each time. So we've got to consider how to get that message across to our diverse audiences, as Alana also pointed out, because those stakeholders essentially are multiple, as we know, in our sort of business, sort of daily business operations. And so we've got to embed that fully in our business agenda. And, you know, we have to also be very much aware of constant change and constant monitoring. So, you know, one of the core aspects of good communication is to understand your context. We talked a little bit about this last time, but really understand what's going on and out there in the wider world, what those regulatory challenges are, what the consumer's mood and sort of response is, and what their requirements and demands are, because after all, key stakeholders like consumers are the people we work with, we work for as fashion textile organisations, and we've got to understand where they're coming from, what they want, what their needs are, and what their value system is, because as we know increasingly, as we'll see in a moment, consumers are increasingly aware, they're knowledgeable, and they are demanding sustainable practice from the objects and the garments that they buy. So it is all about communication objectives, audience, story, and channels, and these do adapt over time. So this you know, again, which I think this very illustrative quote here from the Ganni CEO shows it's an ongoing process, and you know, we must be constantly changing and improving it as we go. Next slide, please. So I just here brought up this very interesting little formula. This is what we call the 3 C's of communicating sustainably. It's a simple formula, but it's one that I think enables us to sort of constantly remind ourselves of what we should be doing, but also when we do communicate sustainably through to our various stakeholders, when we are crafting these sustainability messages, this is a really good way of checking them out before they go out, or once we have sort of put them out through various aspects of our sort of communication, through sort of social media or websites or campaigns, that we can sort of check back on this. And again, underpinning this little formula is that the 3 C's of communicating sustainability are all about, you know, very carefully considered communications. And this is, as I said earlier, this is one of our most powerful ways to sort of effect change in terms of our stakeholders. So we're basically looking at coherence. So again, very much having science-driven communication. This has got to be at the core of everything that we do. We lead with science. It's got to be evidence-based, transparent messages that really work on the sort of the logical side of the brain of our stakeholders, things that they can tangibly understand and sort of see, you know, and test and show that you tested out and you know, you are doing what you say you're doing. They've got to be also very clear, and sort of clarity is very important here. So, and again, if you think about how the Green Claims Code has very much focused on words, so we're really talking right down to the micro level here. So if you are going to use words such as organic or environmentally friendly, that, you know, that's very clearly spelt out, okay, and also is evidence-based. You actually sort of substantiate what you mean by that. And so this all adds up to this convincing, credible, clear, persuasive narrative that you're making that fundamentally enables your stakeholders to make sense of what you're saying and make sense of their world, and an understanding of why sort of responsible and sustainable production and consumption is the way forward. And you know, in doing this, we can engage, as I say, all our stakeholders. Those also might involve our employees, because often we not neglect our employees, or maybe we tell them last, or we don't sort of engage them in this communication. So it's really important for employees to be on board with that. I used to do a little test of fashion brands. I'm not going to name any names, but you know, if I wanted to sort of test out to see, even on the shop floor at point of retail, how they were communicating sustainably and effectively and consistently, and how they were implementing this little formula you see here, I would, you know, go onto the shop floor, be on the shop floor as a consumer, and I'd ask an employee, you know, were any of their sort of collection sustainable, and if so, what did that mean? I wasn't quizzing them or putting them on the spot, but I was just wanting to know if there was a general knowledge of that amongst employees. And it's a little test that I think is quite interesting and important, and that organizations should sort of actually communicate and train their employees internally and ensure that they align with your values in terms of upholding your sustainability behaviours. So it is all about generating stakeholder interest in this journey that I'm talking about, that is, you know, basically exemplified here as a formula, but this formula can be used to test out your journey at each stage of the sort of the development of your sustainability messages. It is also a reminder that all of this is highly competitive and adds to a strategic approach. A strategic approach is one that we think ahead and we plan for. We don't just react to. And I think a lot of problems in the past with sort of sustainable communication from brands and companies in the fashion and textile sector have been very reactive. So we have to avoid that. And we are ultimately trying to sort of impact on mindsets and behaviours, as I said. That's really important. We're trying to sort of, I guess, reimagine and recalibrate people's values, and that is including your employees as well as all your other stakeholders. We're trying to sort of champion change in this regard, and we're trying to sort of use storytelling as a creative way to activate this little formula you're seeing here on the screen, to ultimately motivate people to drive transformational change in sustainable practice. Next slide, please. So we can see that, you know, what I'm moving towards here is really getting inside the heads and the hearts of our stakeholders, whether those are suppliers, whether they're in a B2B or setting, or whether those are consumers in a B2C setting. And we know that fashion brands then are offering more than products. And we know that our consumers in particular are not buying products, they're buying what they often represent in their value system, and that often is aligned now with being responsible. And we know that this is where consumer preferences and perceptions are heading, and we touched on this a little last time, but we, you know, supported that by current market research reports from McKinsey et al. So, you know, it is all about communicating fashion options that are critical to promote this positive brand reputation and brand loyalty. So as I said earlier, your whole brand ethos should be very centered around this ability to sort of be sustainable and create sustainable products. So again, as a reminder of bringing on board what we just saw in the formula, the message needs to be transparent and credible, based on very clear language, which ultimately will enable an organization to be competitive. And it is a sustainable advantage because fundamentally you are aligning yourself with what the market requires and what your consumer is demanding and what your consumer, what their lifestyle is and what they're expecting from your organization. Next slide, please. So what I'm ultimately saying, therefore, is, you know, sustainability needs to be a mainstream part of your mainstream business agenda, and is this recognition of the role that that all organizations across the supply chain for fashion and textiles, all of them have a responsibility in building this equitable and sustainable landscape. And, you know, it is important because, as I've just said, you know, it does give opportunities for organizations to stand out and to be leaders in this, and to sort of show the way. And there are a number of cases we'll showcase in a moment that exemplify that. And I've already shown Gani, who have their own specific and particular take on it. And that was also quite interesting because all the brands that we will cite as case studies, each one of them does their sort of sustainable communication in a particular way, reflective of their individual brand ethos, whilst they all might align with the same values, i.e. sort of, you know, trying to be more sustainable and to sort of demonstrate the sustainable production practices to impact on consumption behaviours. They are all communicating creatively this very thing in a slightly different way to sort of differentiate themselves, which obviously is very important in the marketplace. But back to what I said, well-crafted communication is a powerful tool. Don't forget to engage your employees. It drives internal change, but it also clicks over to drive your external relationships with a range of stakeholders to fulfill your sustainability goals within the organization and to align those with the wider planetary climate requirements that we have to meet within the next few decades. Next slide, please. So the key to this is another little formula, I guess, that is neat and easy to remember, but it's summarized as, and this is also something you can use again, rather like the previous formula about good, the C's formula about what constitutes good sustainable communication, but this is more the process. This is now focusing on how to communicate and how to get this done in the most effective way. So we have to think about, what do we want people to know about what we're doing in terms of our sustainable practice, and what's the information we want to share and the messages that we want to convey. Ultimately, in doing so, what do we want our stakeholders to feel? And this is obviously working on the sort of more emotional levels of our sort of relationship with our consumers. Okay, feelings run deep, and there's no question that in terms of sustainability that is core. But in terms of that, you know, when we're talking about emotions are very sort of human oriented and people facing. So our messaging should very much be that. And a lot of the research that we've done suggests that the more sort of we can contextualize our sustainability messages in terms of people and what it means to them, from the employees and how they're working and their working conditions, to the way that consumers will be able to use a product or buy a sustainable fashion item and have that align with their sort of value system, pay more for a product that is sustainable, that will last longer and have sort of durability and longevity, as an example. And finally, it is about the action. You know, what are we asking people to do, and what actions are we wanting them to take as a result of our communications? Of course, as we know with consumers, the actions and activities don't just stop once a point of purchase. They don't stop in those stores that I'm asking the employees, you know, what does sustainability mean to their brands, and where is their sustainable fashion range, and how is it sustainable? It goes beyond that. We know that the role of the consumer is also important in post-consumption terms, in order to educate the consumer in terms of how to care for their clothing, how to manage their wardrobes, and how to extend the lifetime of products beyond maybe their use for it. So these are all very important considerations. Next slide, please. So we know this matters, and there is a sort of perception behaviour gap that is noted across industry reports in the last decade up to now, and increasingly so. We see that 60% of consumers, as a recent survey said, say transparency is important. Many actively seek out information during the purchasing process. We've got, you know, over half of people believe it's important to buy from brands with good ethical working conditions. So back to that people-facing story of how the sort of, you know, sort of fashion and textiles are produced and in what conditions across the global supply chain. And we see again, over half say that they need to understand the product fully, including what materials are being used. So clearly, you know, we've talked before about product passports, but giving consumers information and doing that sort of comprehensively and doing that digitally and accessibly is very important. And, you know, under half do regularly check labels for information. Of course, we have relied so much on that, but maybe it's not always the right way of getting information across on that very long, extended cow's tongue of a label that many people cut out. So maybe again, product passports as an example are a good alternative. But it is all about this perception behaviour gap between noted across both industry and academic research, is consistently about how consumers want to shop and how we are as a fashion industry and a textile industry, how we're equipping them to act on their desires and to do that in a sort of transformational way. Next slide, please. So again, back to this sort of another sort of checklist of things we should be doing. So we should be identifying what we're trying to achieve, our objectives. We're going to locate our audiences, who we're trying to reach. And clearly, you know, some organisations and some fashion brands are appealing to different demographic segments, and we have to be highly aware of that and what their sort of shifting value systems are. We then obviously have to devise our story, and we can obviously devise that in a myriad of ways and creatively, but obviously ultimately to make that relatable. And then obviously look at the channels that we're going to use to disseminate your story. Obviously sort of social media is a key aspect of that, but it's not the only way to do that. So an omni-channel approach might be the best one, or it could be sort of strategized in a sort of staged way. Ultimately, this won't be our focus today, but that will be our focus for our next seminar, just as a sort of a teaser for that. Next slide, please. So ultimately, in terms of narrating sustainably, we are looking at our USP. Our story should capture what's unique about our sustainability efforts for our companies, I've said to some extent already, but I've been building up to this. And it should reflect our brand's personality and our ethos. What are our core values as a brand? So that consumers and stakeholders and anybody we're working with can decide to align with it in a particular way. And again, you're always checking that you're integrating sustainability across all of your operations and ensuring that it's very closely aligned to your business strategy. And of course, there's always a good option to sort of weave that into your sustainability story. Okay, so again, your key questions that you can use: what are your sustainability differentiators? What makes you stand out? And you have to have a good understanding of what your competitors are doing. Obviously not copying it or even mirroring it, but you can, I guess, have a sort of conversation with them across what you're doing in terms of your sustainability sort of efforts and behaviours. And what do you want to be known for in terms of a sustainability effort? And I would suggest in some of the examples we're going to show you, that some organisations have done this incredibly well and are, you know, unique and distinctive in their sustainability effort. Next slide, please. So one of those is this, and this is Levi's, their Buy Better, Wear Longer campaign from a few years ago. It is and offers a compelling story. Okay, it was the capstone of their communications plan, and obviously what was really interesting to me about this was it wasn't a sort of an omni-channel campaign, but you know, it followed right through to their sort of the labels on their clothing, where you were reminded of this Buy Better, Wear Longer tagline. So, you know, this was to me a very sort of short, sharp, compelling sort of tagline that very much sort of answered the brief in terms of encouraging consumers to basically invest in sustainability, because if so, then they would be assuring that their products, and in this case jeans, which obviously are highly durable, but they would not just, the jeans wouldn't just last, but they would be worn actively longer. So this was, you know, a way of creating a quality clothing, which we know Levi's is associated with, that was originally workwear 100 years ago. It's a sort of heritage brand. But this, you know, so not only has the brand lasted and has longevity, but its clothing is, and its iconic denim is the same, and it should last for generations. And so by Levi's proving that they have and apply sustainable production practices and invest in technology to enable that, they want the consumer, they invite the consumer here to buy into the same activity. This was interesting as well, because it demonstrated what sustainability can, what it means in a business context, and particularly this notion of durability and longevity, which is associated with the material of denim. And it captures people's attentions to get sustainability onto their agenda, and it's highlighting this very much. And it was very much aimed at a younger demographic, Gen YZ, and actually, they used 6 young globally based activists and celebrities through a social media campaign to sort of endorse this and invite the consumer in to be part of this very sort of successful campaign. Next slide, please. So it is important then to sort of be credible and authentic, as we've seen, and to, as I've said already, to inform and test the credibility of a story. We've got to obviously identify the critical proof points, and you could see that there with Levi's doing that very clearly, aligning durability and longevity with their brand ethos, and ensuring obviously your story has enough evidence as well, because it will stand up to scrutiny, and identify ultimately this big theme, or what I call the big idea for your story, which is fulfilling your strategy. And there we could see that was very much about, you know, long-lasting sort of garments such as jeans, but not just the fact that they could last longer in your wardrobe, but they should last longer in the wear, so they become your second skin, and therefore you value them, and you don't dispose of them lightly. So again, think about the hook or the key message, and we saw there with Levi's that was very clearly and simply communicated, and it very much aligned with audience values, and was a highly successful campaign using influencers that were highly relatable to the target audience that they were trying to impact in terms of their sort of emotions and their behaviours. Next slide, please. So think about taking a position, therefore. What's unique about you? Okay. And this has to be, you know, concise content. I always think that, you know, we're all poets at heart, so it's your chance to be a sustainability poet. Create a clear, consistent, coherent storyline back to our C's model, all the C's, reflective of your core ethos, your brand value, the things that you really hold dear and that you align with in terms of effecting transformational, sustainable change across the fashion supply chain. Reformation is an LA company, an LA fashion brand, and quite noted for being sort of provocative, but with sort of using humour, but also very much sort of grabbing attention and trying to impact on emotions and behaviours in terms of sustainability. And this is one of their little campaigns that's featured outside. Actually, again, here, one that's not on social media, although they did push it across social media, but this is, carried right through to their store, to point of sale. Being naked is the most number one important sustainable option. We're number two. So, this is a well-crafted, quirky tone that they tend to adopt throughout their marketing strategies. And as I say, it's omni-channel as well. It's not all about social media, even if you are trying to reach a certain demographic. So, this is also, you can't deny it in many ways. This is, you can see a sort of personality coming through here, and a sort of an engaging way of talking about sustainable practice and trying to influence transformational change. Next slide, please. Now, of course, we couldn't sort of go any further in terms of exemplifying this without looking at some key sort of examples from the past that are very famous, and sort of that again make the story relatable and accessible, grab attention, use inspiring language, use attention grabbing headlines, obviously then demonstrate what is being delivered ultimately. Don't just sort of let the consumer sort of work for themselves in all of this. And here we can see we've got it's Patagonia's very clever "Don't buy this jacket," and what's really great about this is that it's almost a sort of an anti-sustainability message at first glance, but it's not. It's actually a very sort of powerful sustainability message in the headline. Don't buy any more than you need, and the claims here: we're making useful clothing that lasts a long time, longevity. You don't need to buy what you don't need. So very much trying to sort of appeal to the value system of the consumer. We help you repair your gear. You pledge to fix what's broken. So here you've got an enablement going on here. So Patagonia are actually backing it up by saying, we're in this with you. It's a partnership, and we know you want to sort of extend the life of your second skin, your second Patagonia skin, the thing that this jacket that you've climbed the highest mountain with, or done the longest walks on, or had lots of outdoor fun with. And we want to work with you to extend its life by repairing, which is a very powerful sort of option in terms of behaviours. Reuse, we want to find a home for a Patagonia gear. You no longer need to sell it or pass it on. So again, they have a reuse scheme. Okay, so this is also very important to see brands enabling the consumer behaviour. Often we can, as brands, tell consumers what they should be doing and explain why they should be buying into your sustainable product, but you don't enable them to work with it and to manage their wardrobe, as I was saying before, in a post-consumer end-of-life situation. Recycle it. Again, we will take back your gear that's worn out. And so again, it's like crafting this very powerful partnership with the consumer. And the language does this in using very personalized conversational tones here and structures. You pledge to keep your stuff out of the landfill and incinerator. We'll help you do that. We're doing this together. So again, this is about reimagining. Together, we'll reimagine a world where we can take only what nature can replace. So very much, enabling this and not pushing it all onto the consumer or making them feel guilty or making them feel that it's completely their responsibility, because it isn't. And this is a very powerful, another very powerful approach to sort of communicating sustainably that impacts on the emotions, but also very much on the behaviours in a transformational way. Next slide, please. So again, another one from Patagonia, which was everything but the teeth. And again, this is, it shows that Patagonia, you know, even though they have been lauded and are exemplified as a leader in sustainable sort of communication campaigns and sustainability, but as they said, the only part of the Patagonia better sweater that isn't made from recycled materials, zipper teeth. The rest just keeps getting better for the environment, whilst the sweater remains as soft and warm and as durable as it has been. So again, getting out that durability message, getting out the longevity message, but also admitting we've still a way to go. So back to what I said at the beginning, this is a journey, and we have to sort of admit where we are on that journey. We have to also engage our stakeholders and invite them in on that journey, and acknowledge that it is, you know, iterative, and that we are moving to get forwards together, but we have not got all the solutions. And certainly trims and zips often can be pesky, and you know, we're still working on how to make those and other materials sort of recyclable, as an example. Next slide, please. So this is the final slide, which I think brings us nicely up to time, and hopefully a little bit of time for questions. Yeah, so it's all about, you know, transparency. We said, demonstrate why the product or service is sustainable. And you can do that and demonstrate that in a range of ways, as we've seen, and we can use a range of strategies aligned with your own brand ethos, brand personality, and brand values, and, you know, also being cognizant of what your stakeholders also, where they're coming from on this and what they're needing. You know, the fashion sector basically has to avoid greenwashing, you know, so watch those words, and we have lists of words that are to be avoided unless you can basically frame them with science in your messaging and brand storytelling. And that can be words like organic, because if you can't prove it, then you're going to be called out for it, as we have seen with some brands already, by other sort of pressure groups, or by the Green Claims Code itself. Clear messaging we've seen is important. That C's diagram, you know, all the C's, clear messaging, you know, what type of eco-friendly initiative will help your consumers? Are you saving water? Are you using less electricity in your production? How are you reducing impact? And how are you inviting the consumer, you know, at sort of post-consumption levels to engage with you? As we could see, Patagonia's Don't Buy This Jacket campaign was very effective in that regard. You need these compelling messages. The fashion sector has influence in storytelling and visual discourse, and it can impact so profoundly on behaviours. And in order to implement these circular solutions, we need, and align with the policy landscape, we need to basically ensure that we are, you know, being as sort of clear and compelling as possible. And these clear, compelling messages are crafted for different stakeholders with some core themes aligned with values. We obviously need accessible communication that are multi-channel, omni-channel, and co-creational. That's got to be so carefully thought through. And next time we'll all focus more on how to get the message out through those channels. But we've seen a range of ways that can be used, some traditional point of sale, print, or obviously social media influencers used by others in our case studies today. And these substantiated science-driven sort of comms is important. This basing on facts is critical. We need to empower our stakeholders ultimately to pressure for behavioural change and to impact on policies and to meet those key climate targets. And we can do that collaboratively, as we could see. That's certainly where Patagonia's example from their sort of Don't Buy This Jacket campaign was heading. And we are ultimately promoting sustainable lifestyles to reduce overproduction and overconsumption, but we're working on that together. It is a collaborative effort across the value chain, and communication is the driver and the core for that. Communication that gets that sustainability message very powerfully across and invites all your stakeholders to work together to impact on that end. Next slide, please. So thank you. That's where we are today. There is a QR code there for our Impact Plus website, which is where we have been doing all of our research. And I do invite you to visit that, because you could see the whole range of research that we've been doing and working specifically with environmental scientists to understand basically what we're basing basically our sustainability behaviours on, and we're challenging those, questioning those, and hopefully trying to improve those with a range of scientists. And so please visit that website. And please get back to us with any questions you might have, and watch out obviously for the next stage in our seminar series, which will be focusing on communicating sustainably and looking specifically at channels and how we disseminate our sustainability messages based on our validated actions.